Good afternoon. Thank you for joining. I'm John Jannarone, editor-in-chief of IPO Edge, hosting today's event with my colleague Jarrett Banks, who you'll meet momentarily. Today we have with us not only Niccolo de Masi, who's the CEO of DMY Technology Group 4, but the co-founder and CEO of Planet, which of course is going public through a merger with DMYQ. Before we meet all of today's guests, I just want to take care of a couple of housekeeping issues. First of all, we encourage you to ask questions, and the easiest way to do that is right there in the Zoom portal. So if you submit those, we'll get to those later on in the hour. You can also shoot an email to editor@ipo-edge.com, and we can read them there as well. Additionally, if you'd like to watch a replay, we'll have that published later this afternoon. The easiest way to find that is to go to our website, ipo-edge.com, or go on your Bloomberg terminal or on Yahoo Finance under the ticker DMYQ, and you'll also find it there. One other thing that I'd like to talk about is that we have a vote coming up, and you don't need to wait for December 3rd, but you should probably just go ahead, go to your broker's website. Is the easiest way. It only takes a couple of moments. Even if you only own a few shares in aggregate, all these shares add up. So please, we encourage you to go vote. And then as you can see here on the screen, there's plenty more information you can get if you're having any issues. And you can also find that on our announcement, and it'll be on the replay article later on as well. With that, I'm happy to bring on Niccolo de Masi. Now, I'm going to give Niccolo a little bit of an introduction. I think a lot of you know very well who he is. He's been in our program before. Niccolo's completed 25 mergers in his career. He has a lot of public company experience, including being former CEO of Glue Mobile, Monster Mob, and Hands-On Mobile. Additionally, he's served on 9 public company boards, the first 3 DMY Technology SPAC IPOs, Rush Street, Genius Sports, and IonQ, and of course, he's going to join the board of Planet. Thanks for joining again today, Niccolo. We're happy to have you.
Pleasure to be here as always, John.
So, Niccolo, before we get into Planet itself, can you tell us a little bit about the 4th SPAC in the DMY family? What were you looking for, and why did this company stand out so much?
Yeah, it's actually our biggest trust account to date. Probably has our highest quality shareholder list to date as well. I like to think, John, that we get better every time we do this, and I think that we have hopefully even better chops at finding our partner companies. Planet Labs is a business that I've been actually pursuing since our first SPAC. So we fell in love with this business all the way back in DMY1. We've always believed that this company has the kind of upside and potential of kind of the next Google, Apple, or even Tesla, if you will. It builds its own, hardware because it's serious about software. They have we think, 5 to 7 year lead over anybody else attempting to do what Planet does, even if they have unlimited capital. So the barriers to entry are really, really high, both scientifically and practically in terms of the go-to-market motion. You'll remember, John, that we like to look for what we call all-weather companies, businesses that are price givers. They're able to perform regardless of the macro cycle, inflation, COVID, lockdown. Planet's kind of an ultimate form and expression of an all-weather company, right? They have basically, in our mind, a monopoly on a whole Earth daily scan. It's their own data. They control it at the point of capture. They're not aggregating data. It's their own data. They build their own satellites, assemble them in-house. That gives them a commanding innovation lead in how quickly Will Marshall and team can take an idea into orbit. And we believe, as you've seen with our second SPAC, Genius and beyond, that cutting-edge engineering companies in the data space, they trade at a premium. And the reason for that is there are so many ways to win. Hopefully, Will spend some time talking about his addressable verticals and his customers, but this is a business that is democratizing the ability to index and search whole Earth data. And so I think it'll look a lot like Google in 10, 20 years. I mean, think about where Google was in 2001 when it was getting started. People didn't know how you could use this search functionality. Same thing's going to happen to Planet. Whether or not you are government's regulators, the Fortune 5,000 really, not just 500. Ultimately, I think even consumers will be accessing this data off your phone. Today, you can access it off a web portal. If you look at the transaction itself, John, we've got Koch Industries leading the pipe along with BlackRock, Mark Benioff, CPPIB. Everyone has a slightly different reason why they love this business, but all of them agree that it's just instrumental to the future of their company, and I would argue to humanity itself. The business is a public benefit corporation. There's actually a lot of money to be made in sustainability because everybody has to hit sustainability goals. And as you can hear from Will, it all starts with knowing where you are and being able to measure where you are and where you're going. That means you need to pay for Planet's data. Last thing I'll say before I pass this over back to you, Will, is in the long term in every value chain, all the values in data. In the space segment, it's going to be in data. It's not in tourism. It's in data long term. And so you can hold me to this in the next decade and beyond. I think Planet will be the most valuable business in the space. I mean, it's already the 800-pound gorilla of whole Earth data. It's going to get the capital from this IPO to invest in growing the sales team and other high value initiatives like growing software. It's going to make it easier and easier to take down their data. And we're going to do more and more impressive stuff with that data, which will just expand the TAM and expand the TAM, right? So it's creating a segment, disrupting that segment, and it's going to own that segment. And as a public company with higher visibility, we'll be able to continue attracting the best and brightest and even growing inorganically on top of that. So obviously we're excited to be here. Couldn't be more honored to be working with Will and team.
Great. I've got a lot more questions I want to ask you, Niccolo, but as you said, let's let Will talk about his company. He's the co-founder, CEO, Will Marshall, a special guest. I'm going to let Jarrett Banks pick it up from here. Jarrett, take it away.
Thanks, John, and welcome back to the program, Will.
Pleased to be here. Thanks, Jarrett and John, for having us.
Now, I understand we have a video ready to go. It's going to give us an overview of the company.
Yeah, I have a few slides I can give a quick snapshot. Getting practiced at this now. And obviously, we spoke a bit about the company last time, but yeah, let's bring those up. Just give you a quick snapshot. Planet at a glance. This slide just gives you a few facts for those new to Planet. On the left-hand side, you see business. The product side, we've got 200 satellites in orbit. So it's the largest fleet of Earth imaging satellites ever erected. And they image 300 million square kilometers of the Earth every day. That's just over twice the landmass of the Earth. So we actually image some areas of the Earth multiple times a day. And that's the first time a scan of the planet has ever happened. And I'll talk about how that works in the video in a second. All of that data we process to be what we call machine learning ready or analytics ready, so that we can then do change detection and feature detection, like extract out roads and buildings and ships and all of that out of the data. On the right-hand side, you see quick at a glance at business metrics. You can see just over 100 million in revenue. That was last year, so because we're a fiscal year end in January, and so FY21 was last year. And then all that, most of that, 90% of it is recurring revenue. And super importantly, the gross margins piece, and I put it up there just because 62% gross margins includes the cost of the satellites. I think a lot of people come into Planet and think, oh, it's a satellite company. Well, not really. It is a data business. We do have satellites at the back end, but that's like calling Google a server company. No, it's a search company. The value proposition is in the data in our case. And once we have the satellites up there, which they are all now as a mature fleet, we can sell the imagery multiple times. That information, and then of course the incremental cost of selling it the second and the third time is really low. So our direct margins are very high, which means that we have a high growth and a high gross margins business. The 62% is on our PlanetScope business, which is 73% of our revenue last year. So that's quick numbers at a glance and a bit of context. Let's go to the video next. So this is just a quick video of how the system works. So we have two satellite fleets. One is 180 satellites in a polar orbit. You'll see that coming down, and each takes a strip of images, and it ends up being like a line scanner for the Earth, because the Earth rotates underneath this plane of satellites every 24 hours, and that means that we scan the Earth's surface every 24 hours. Then, separately, we acquired a Google's satellite fleet called SkySats from them, and those ones that we've now built up that satellite fleet to have 21 satellites. So the scan happens at 3-meter resolution. The high resolution can go to 50-centimeter resolution. And we can focus that in on anything that we want up to 12 times per day because of a new fleet of satellites that you just see in orange here. 2 sets of 3 satellites that we put in inclined planes last year on 2 SpaceX rockets at an incredible speed that enables us to get up to 12 revisits a day. Now, these two systems really work in unison. So one does the scan, finds changes. Where you want to focus attention, you can zoom in on that area of interest in the scan by using the higher resolution snapshot. So that's the quick snapshot of how Planet works. On the back end, let me just go to the next slide. What I could potentially do is just, so that's the back end. What's the front end? The front end that the users see is like this. It's an interface to the data, which is a bit like Google Earth, except you've got a time bar. You've got today's image and yesterday's image and a stack of about 1,500 images for any particular location. You select your area of interest, you select what analytic features you want on top of that. I want crop yield, I want roads and buildings, and then that becomes a data feed you subscribe to. So we liken it to a Bloomberg terminal because Bloomberg terminal provides data feeds that help people make smart decisions. We're doing the same, but with this Earth data. The only difference is that we serve many markets, not just finance, and our data is from a proprietary fleet of satellites, whereas Bloomberg mainly aggregates public source data. So the front end is like a Bloomberg, but plus. We call it Bloomberg plus because it's got the extra pieces in a way. Next slide. So I think, what's useful is just to understand what that means to customers. So that's the front end, the back end. Now, what's the value proposition? So this is the vertical markets that we look to. The four on the left-hand side, where over 90% of our revenue is today. Let me just quickly explain how that works. In agriculture, our data is used to improve what's called precision agriculture, because we can tell basically how well the crop is doing in every 3 by 3 meter box on the farmer's field, helping them to improve where to add fertilizer, where to add water, when to harvest. It's called precision agriculture. And the biggest ag companies in the world, like Corteva, buy our data and then use it across millions of farmers' fields to help them improve their crop yield. And since agriculture is 25% of the land of the earth is agriculture, satellites are in a unique position to cover that whole area. In defense and intelligence, you may have noticed some of the developments recently in the press, like the discovery of 100 nuclear missile silos in Western China. That's because of our data. We're uncovering not the thing that the countries already knew to look for, but the new threats that are emerging that they didn't know to look for, because we scan everything and find changes. No government has that scan system, and it's very useful to those governments. On civil government, which is actually our second biggest market after agriculture, in civil government, our data is used for things like disaster response. So floods in Germany recently, we were helping the states respond to those fires. Fires in California, our data was used to help the firefighters, both the real-time action and how to do prevention of future mega fires. We work with then companies like Google on maps. They use our data in a very sophisticated way to update the maps that you see online. This is not just esoteric, it's like directly affecting the maps that you use day to day, because they do tens of thousands of tasks to our high resolution satellites to update the maps to make sure the roads and the buildings are up to date so that your directions are correct. The ones on the right-hand side are vertical markets we think are important in our future. They're not big markets today, although we have some clients, as you can see listed here, but they're big markets in the future. And but a lot of them need some extra software to get to them. So take finance. We can actually tell crop yield across the whole world for soy or wheat or other commodities. That's a big deal for finance, but they don't want pretty pictures. They want a time series calibrated data set. And we haven't got all of that bit. We've got some analytics like crop yield, and we have roads and buildings, but we don't have that into time series calibrated data that they would want. So the main thing about going public is that we're going to have capital to put to work on a few things. Firstly, the go-to-market strategy and the sales and marketing to go after the left-hand 4. All of that 100 million was done with 21 sales reps last year. We need to expand that. And on the right-hand 4, it's software to go up the stack to enable us to meet those customers where they are. So I think just one final slide. If you go to the next slide, there's a slide just on the competitive landscape, because I think a little people get a little bit confused about Planet because they hear other satellite companies. But this is the number of satellites that the different companies have. As you can see, we've got a little bit more than everyone else. And this is what enables the scan, which is what opens up all these vertical markets. The nearest other player images about 1% of the landmass of the Earth per day. And we image just over twice the landmass of the Earth per day. So we've got about 100 times the area coverage. Now, the area is only one feature. There's also resolution, there's spectral resolution, there's lots of things. But area coverage is super important for those kind of applications I just mentioned. Agriculture, 25% of the landmass of the Earth. Forestry, 25% of the landmass of the Earth. If people want to do disaster response, you need everywhere for those floods, for those fires, for those earthquakes, and so on. And also for that defense and intelligence application I just told you. All of this is because of the scan system. And so our data the data set that's driving these market expansion is from this scan, and no one else has the scan. And even if they wanted to do it, it would take them launching the largest fleet of satellites back to catch us up, but they would definitely not be able to go and get the archive. So it's very difficult to build that system, and it's impossible to go back and get the archive. So that's a bit of a quick, whistle-stop tour of Planet to give your listeners a quick overview. We can stop the slideshow now.
That's great. Yes, as you mentioned, those competitors. Now, I did see an article about you guys in the Wall Street Journal today, basically saying the satellite industry grows as investors bet billions on space-derived data, and the bet that us humans, us Earthlings, will be willing to pay for that granularity that you're talking about. Can you talk a little bit more about how you differentiate yourself from competitors?
Well, again, I mean, I welcome competition. I mean, I think it's great, but we are very different from anyone else in the sense of having this scan system. No one else has that. Even on the high resolution side, we have more high resolution satellites than anyone else, and so we can go more frequently to any particular site than anyone else. We can go up to 12 times per day. No one else has that. But when that article suggested that the analytics is not important, it said, oh, it's all about the resolution. That's only a very narrow way to think about this, in my opinion. The analytics is what extracts out the value. The data is the differentiation, the moat, but you extract out the value with the analytics that sit on top. You'll notice that we just did announced a little acquisition of a company called Vandersat that's all about satellite data intelligence. And that's to help us to accelerate our product roadmap, especially in agriculture and insurance. They do some really neat tricks with satellite data. I believe there's a lot more value in this going up the stack. So our president and head of product and business here at Planet came having previously led product at Twitter. And they had the Firehose product of Twitter Firehose. And they thought, oh, this would be useful to lots of different players. And Google got value out of it for search, and the US government got value out of it for understanding what's people's sentiment. But a lot of companies didn't know what to do with 500 million tweets a day in 100 different languages. What are they going to do with that? Right? For most companies, they couldn't digest all that data and get value from it until they started adding analytics services. Like, just tell me how many times my company is mentioned, or what's the sentiment around that. And then if I could have that'd be useful, right? And then lots more people got value out of the Twitter Firehose, and that's a big business, by the way, for them. Now, we've got exactly the same, right? We've got a fire hose of data. Google's getting value out of that. US government's, big ag companies are getting value out of that. That's great, but that's because they have teams of geospatial engineers. Our task for the next decade is to enable us to extract out that value so that everyone, that small insurance company, that hedge fund, that NGO, those developers that are starting up a new company can all get value directly out of the satellite imagery. And that's going to take adding some of these analytics. So I disagree with some of the aspects of that article because I don't think it sees the value in that analytics. But I do want to emphasize that the most of those market segments that are growing are because of a scan system, and that system only Planet has. That's the main thing that differentiates us from the competition.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just add to that, Jarrett, we spend a lot of time diligencing the space as we do every time DNY picks a partner company. Before the internet existed, there was this thing, ARPANET, right, that connected some universities together and some particle accelerators, perhaps. And people that did that could have found a way to increase bandwidth between U.S. government agencies. That did not change the world to the same extent that the global internet did, right? And so there's, as Will says, only one use case where resolution, is primal, and that's kind of the, Osama bin Laden Abbottabad raid. You can sell to 3-letter agencies. There's a finite number of those. Planet's the only business that does what we do in terms of scanning the whole Earth and making most of the revenue, if not the super majority of revenue, off of industry, right? So currently, there's plenty of Fortune 500 companies that are customers. I think the Fortune 5,000 will be customers. There's currently plenty of governments, state, local, friendly, domestic, that are customers. The beautiful thing about Will's business model is the only person selling data on a one-to-many basis. He's not a professional services task, the one satellite with the resolution. He's I scan the Earth, once or twice a day, almost twice a day, and I'm going to index the Earth, make it searchable, and sell it to everyone from Google for mapping to people that want the data for financial purposes in terms of commodity trading, logistics tracking, as Will mentioned, agriculture. But I actually think that when you stand back and look at this, each one of those verticals has at least $1 billion of capturable revenue for Planet, and uniquely Planet because of the way that they're democratizing Earth data. But I think that most of us on this call haven't even thought of all the uses that are going to come off of this foundational data layer. I mean, people, look, Alta Vista was in search, Yahoo did search. They had about a similar market share to those graphs Will just showed of how many satellites, how much data we have. Will also is modest about the fact that he's been collecting data for already 5, 6, 7, years. And so we have a backwards looking repository of data that gives them an advantage in training machine learning algorithms and giving people, an actual evolutionary picture of what's been going on. It's very, very powerful, right? And tech markets are pretty clear in DMY's experience. A 1-year coding advantage in enterprise software is usually fatal for the number 3 player, and it's a big problem for the number 2 player. We have a 5 to 7 year hardware launch software advantage. I mean, it's really hard to be credible in my mind if your business plan was, hacking it off of Planet's website and saying someday we'll catch up. You never really catch up in the tech space. I mean, Google has led in search for 20 years. And so Will's getting the money, he's getting the visibility. We think Planet will become a verb as it democratizes, global Earth data. There's a lot of people who haven't heard of Planet on this, interview session alone with you guys. Everyone is following us. It's very, very early here. Very people have heard of Planet. We turn up in the newspapers all the time as the person supplying the photo that enables you to find that missile silo in China, as Will said. There will be a day when every Fortune 1000 business has a subscription. There'll be a mobile app. This will be something everybody can use. And there's so many ways to win here because we can provide data. Will's got a great analogy here on, data being the oil of the next 20 years, right? It's the commodity that matters, but he can resell it to everybody. He can sell the same liter of oil to multiple people, if not an infinite number of people. So this is really a cloud business with cloud gross margins, cloud growth rates, and an enviable shareholder list. I think he's going to build a lot of momentum organically, let alone as he starts to consolidate, as he was Vandersat, using the public market advantages we're about to have in a couple of weeks.
That's fantastic. Let's get into those verticals just a little bit before we turn it over to Q&A. Now, you mentioned agriculture, you mentioned firms like Corteva. Talk us through that total addressable market and how you reach those customers and what you offer.
Well, look, what we offer them is, this is really about big data and AI powering digital transformation in those industries. And they're multi-trillion-dollar industries, right? And so what we're providing is intelligence to the farmers to where to plant, what to plant, when to harvest, and so on, when to add fertilizer and so on, that helps them to improve crop yield and decrease costs. And they're not going to be competitive if they don't do it. We just announced a new client. This is the US Department of Agriculture. And what they're doing with our data is actually really interesting. They're using it to understand the crops across the whole US. And then they're using that into their crop report that then, by the way, all the hedge funds hang their bets on. and they're really eager. When's that clock report come out? It comes out every 6 months, I think. Well, we can do that for the whole world and not just the United States, and we can do it much more frequently. That is, of course, got huge value to the hedge funds, right? But again, we have to work on some of the software stack to enable that sort of use case.
And then I don't know if you can talk freely about military intelligence applications, but what can you tell us in that vertical?
Well, again, what this is all about is the unique scan. So, for example, the United States government might be looking at North Korea, and they might be looking at a particular nuclear silo, and they're tracking that nuclear facility because, of course, they want to know what's going on. But we find, because we've scanned all of North Korea, we find that there's been a mudslide over here. Ooh, why is that? That's interesting. Maybe they've got a new facility. In fact, that's a real case. So they found a new facility because our scan found new stuff. Recently, the New York Times did a really fascinating piece of sort of video story on their website where they tracked how North Korea was getting oil illicitly via a series of transshipments. So ships illegally mating in the night, transferring oil and then moving things down. But it's only because we had the scan of that whole area could trace back where the ships came from. So that sort of data is really important, and we provide it to governments and we provide it to NGOs and think tanks, and that data is shedding light on world events, and it's super important to the governments. And I think it's important to be able to serve those sort of peace and security, because I think intelligence diffuses tension. You're much less likely to go to war if you know what the other countries are doing. And so we think it's a really important thing for peace and security as well.
And you mentioned those silos in China last time, I think, as well, that your company discovered.
Yeah, I'm just spicing it up with some other examples.
Fantastic. Now, another thing we mentioned last time was privacy, and I do think it's worth getting into this again. Talk to us about the safeguards that you have in place for regular people who are concerned about Big Brother in the sky.
Well, firstly, I think it's a legitimate concern, but secondly, straight away, our resolution is not sufficient to see a person, certainly not to identify a person from space. I mean, remember, we're 500 kilometers away. So it's like taking a picture from where we are here in San Francisco to Los Angeles. And we've got our telescopes and they're very powerful, but they're still 500 kilometers away. So you can't really identify a person from space, even with the biggest satellites. And that's because you're so far away. With drones, you could, but because you can fly much lower. But we actually purposely don't like that and don't want to get into the area of personal privacy. And we think that's an important thing. Also, we have a careful review process for clients. So we check them against the embargo list of the US and the EU and the UN. And also we have an ethics committee that reviews cases and checks that we really want to serve clients. And so we have had cases where we've decided not to, because we think the right thing is to maximize good. Now, our data is heavily bent towards good, like all the agriculture, disaster response, and even the peace and security piece of it. But we want to ensure that it doesn't get into bad hands of bad actors.
That's great. Let's keep going. And I do see those questions in the queue. So a reminder to please continue to send them. And we will ask Will and Niccolo as we get a little bit further in the broadcast. So talk to us a little bit more about the technology at work here. What can you tell us about your unique offering here?
Well, on the analyst day, we got to invite some of the analysts to come see around the lab. And it's very hard to describe all of that without it, but you can read some of the reports that are starting to come out from the analysts. We've had 4 reports come out, and they're all very positive, and I think do a thorough job at understanding the differentiation, because we integrate, we design and build and operate our satellites in-house. Unlike Maxar, for example, that uses Lockheed or other companies use outsourced third parties, we design and build the satellites in-house. And that gives us a huge leverage to make the satellites more efficient. we've done what we call agile aerospace. We pioneered this, which is a bit like software has done with agile software. We sort of stolen those ideas and applied them to the spacecraft realm. What does that mean? It means releasing early and often. It means testing the satellites regularly and replenishing them on a frequent basis to have the latest technology. And it means launching more than we need. And if one or two fail, it's not the end of the world. We just, we've already got more than we need and replace them with the next best system. In the last 5 years, we've had 4 launches a year. And every time we launch the next generation technology, so roughly every 3 months, we put up new satellites. That agility enables us to have the best sensors, the best radios, the best hard drives, the best compute systems in orbit. Our satellites, despite being orders of magnitude lower than the traditional Earth imaging satellites. In fact, the last satellite of Maxar cost over $800 million for one satellite. And by the way, it broke about well less than its lifetime in orbit, and then they lost 25% of their capacity because they only have 4 satellites. Our satellites, cost more than 1,000 times less than that, which is crazy in of itself. And B, there's many features of our satellites that are more advanced. Those satellites, by the way, do have higher resolution. They can go to 35 centimeters. The maximum we can go to is 50 centimeters. But our radios are faster. We get 1.6 gigabits a second. Our hard drives have more capacity. Our processor speeds are much, much faster. So we design and keep on iterating those. Instead of designing a satellite to have a 20-year life, and we spend 10 years designing and 20 years in operation, so it's basically obsolete before you even launched it. We iterate the satellites, keep it up to date with the latest. I mean, we're basically what we call strapping space to Moore's law. And that agile aerospace is what enables us the many more satellites, that enables us the much more data, which then enables all these markets. So agile aerospace is the backbone of how we service and expand all these market propositions.
Yeah, I mean, look, Jarrett, I'm a physicist. I haven't done my doctorate like Will has. I stopped a few years before that, but I can tell you, having taken INQ public and seen some cutting edge tech in my life, this business is deeply impressive. I mean, we had the privilege of touring their lab before we sort of signed a final agreement, if you will. A number of analysts have had the pleasure as well as some investors. Nobody leaves without being deeply impressed, right? There's no one else in the world that is vertically integrated, like literally in the same building. We're designing, assembling components as well as the sort of final satellite item and running the software, machine learning, the sales. It's hard not to see your way to this being one of the main platform compounders that's going to matter in the next decade, if not the next few decades, because every industry needs this data. We're just scratching the surface of how to use this data and how to add value on top of it. Will, you should chat about 1 + 1 = 3 and how you're adding different data sources here, what the roadmap is, because we're not standing still, right? I mean, we have all this IPO capital. It's going on very high ROI activities like adding salespeople that pay back in 6 months, not 6 quarters or 6 years, adding some software engineers. But, Will announced big moves on the roadmap in just the last few weeks here. And I think everybody, including Michael Bloomberg himself, is contributing to the cause. And I think, that's a big validation that what we're onto here is proprietary data wrapped up in a Bloomberg-like subscription model.
Is this something that would be on a Bloomberg terminal, or would it be always a separate kind of fee?
I actually think there's an interesting possibility, and we've had some collaboration more on the philanthropic side with Mike Bloomberg through Bloomberg Philanthropies, tracking coal power plants that they were very interested in doing, and a few other projects. Most recently, they helped to fund. They put $25 million into our next generation satellite that we recently announced that we're going to be launching a next generation of satellites that hyperspectral satellites that can get at methane and CO2 point source emitters. So which is really cool because the whole world needs to know where the emissions are coming from in order to stop them, and the governments are asking for this, and the companies are asking for it. So, and we'll be selling that data to both. I think it's a super important project, and Mike Bloomberg personally saw that value. Maybe one day we'll see it in the Bloomberg terminal as well.
Great. It's a fantastic story. And let's dig into some of the financials. I'm going to bring back my colleague, John. Take it away, John.
Thanks, Jarrett. So Niccolo, I can put this to you, but Matt, or Will can also help out. You know, something that I really like to ask companies is what goes behind the financial projections. You've got very, very impressive growth. I think something like 51% revenue CAGR over 5 years. Tell us what the ingredients are in that forecast. I mean, I think part of it is that you've got contracts that are already in place. And by the way, these contracts tend to be pretty long-term, right, Niccolo?
No, that's all correct. And look, I mean, Will's the CEO, so he should tackle most of this. What we like about this business is that high retention, strong opportunities to increase the amount of business we do with existing clients. A lot of new customers as we add to the sales team. We lower friction to accessing what started as a fire hose and is getting more productized with people like Kevin Wheel on board, who's ran product Instagram and Twitter. Just awareness, right? You got to remember that no one had heard of Planet, in my opinion, outside of a few industries, a couple of years ago. Today, we're sort of coming out of our shell. Going public is a big coming out party for this business, for government opportunities, as well as, of course, the Fortune 1000. And I think people are just starting to realize how powerful the data is, how applicable it is to them, whether or not you're in finance, logistics, insurance, agriculture, and so on. And we're just excited to turn this into a platform, much like Twitter, Instagram, and so on, and Google, where other people can build on it. We're going to build on it. We're going to collect our toll at all times because it's proprietary data, and Will controls the whole value chain, hardware, software, data at the point of capture, right? And we keep innovating and adding to the capabilities as well as to the data being captured, right? So it's a really, really exciting platform compounder here. Look, the pipeline is huge, and the pipeline is what validates the growth assumptions in here. We have a CFO who's run a number of public companies before from the finance side. Obviously, I've done 9 public boards, as you said, and Will's been preparing to go public for the last few years. And I think you guys know from DMY transactions of old that we like to price conservatively and forecast conservatively because Will's in this for the long term. He and his co-founder have a public benefit corporation here. They have a strong mission, both for the planet and to be a great business. And they're going to prosecute it for not quarters, but I believe decades.
Perfect. Will, well, actually, either one of you can take this one. When I look at something else in the financials that jumps out at me, it's your margin expansion. So in my mind, what I see is, and I remember talking to you about this, Will, when we first met, I thought to myself, wow, you already have 200 of these up in the sky, up in space. So in my mind, very simplistically, I think that there's going to be natural operating leverage because a lot of the investment's already been done, right? So once the machine is working, so to speak, your margins will naturally expand. Can you tell it in your own words, perhaps, Will? Better than I just did.
No, exactly, to your point. So, I mean, look, with the incremental cost of selling an image a second or a third time is extremely low. So we've got very high direct margins. I mean, in the late 90%. And so we definitely believe that only as we grow the business, our gross margins just continue to climb. I mean, as I mentioned in the summary slide, we were already 63% gross margins on the 73% of our business that's the PlanetScope business, because that's the more mature satellite fleet. The higher resolution one we were still investing in after we more recently acquired it from Google. So that one's lagging, but we will get it to the same place. It's just a little bit more time. And so, it's counterintuitive because everyone says, oh my God, satellites must be really high CapEx, therefore low gross margins. No, it's yes, high CapEx, although our CapEx is about 1,000 times less than previous Earth imaging systems. So it's the efficiencies there, but there's still cost of rockets and satellites. But the margins are really high because you get to sell that data multiple times. I like this because it's like you've got a huge moat to get to where you are. Once you get there, it's just a rapidly growing subscription business on the back of that investment.
Makes sense. Niccolo, unless you were going to add to that, I wanted to ask you one question about your role just quickly here. We've got a lot of questions to tackle, but Niccolo, aside from being a physicist, having a lot of public company experience, tell us what your role as a director at the company will be. You've been in the CEO perch yourself. How do you view those two different roles, within an organization?
Well, look, Will's the chairman and CEO of Planet, so I suspect he will conscript me to a number of the committees. I think I'm lined up for the audit committee, for starters. I've really enjoyed, honestly, not being the CEO of businesses for a couple of years now. I feel like I've got the scars of having done hundreds of quarterly earnings calls, and a couple decades of this, and I enjoy supporting people like Will to make them successful. He's got a big vision. We have, I always jokingly say that, you have friends because you can't make all the mistakes yourself. And so myself and my partner, Harry Yu, who was the CFO of Oracle, Accenture, and EMC, I think the two of us have done 60 years of public market experience together, and probably 200 M&A deals and 4 dozen IPOs and secondaries. We get better at it over time, and we're bringing all of that experience and wisdom to bear here for Planet, so that they're successfully set up at this IPO next week, as well as the first earnings call, the second earnings call, the first year. This is when you kind of really build up your investor following, your shareholder base, your analyst research. This company, by the way, we didn't touch on this yet, best attended analyst day we've seen to date for DMY. And that was despite the pandemic, right? So there's people turning up in person, people dialing in. 4 firms have picked up coverage already. I think that's a record, or at least it's tied for a record. It's very difficult to achieve that pre-close.
Yeah.
Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley are around the company as advisors, so they'll be picking up coverage, probably after the first earnings call. And when I started Glue Mobile, we had no research coverage. When we sold the company, we had 13 firms covering it. I have no doubt there will be a double-digit number of firms covering this firm, probably in the first few quarters, even. But look, this is a business built to be public. It's got very wise people on the board already. It's got very wise people in the management team already. I mean, Will has the general counsel of Twitter on the board. He's got a general counsel that already has public company experience, and a CFO as well, and a president, right? And so, for once, I feel like there isn't a lot of heavy lifting for Niccolo to do. This is a business that was going to do an IPO with or without us. I think we just got them a little faster, and hopefully we added some value over the last few months as we finish meeting shareholders, cutting some partnerships, and making this happen, this year instead of next year. But look, we're excited to be here. We're excited to be on the board. It's an honor to be working with a company that can do so much for sustainability and be such a great business in the process. Just scratching the surface of so many customers that are coming back from, Will was at COP26 as well. Like, they all have to measure, or they can't even begin to understand how they're tracking and how they're going to achieve their goals.
Great. Thanks, Niccolo. Now, Will, I see you've already answered a couple of the questions in the queue here, but I'm going to combine a couple of these that came from Keith and from Namal here, so that everybody can hear your answers. So Keith asked, how do you price the data? And then Namal said, who actually owns the data? Are you licensing it? Is it Planet's data? Can you explain that?
Yeah, it is Planet's owned data. We license it out, and that's why we can sell it to multiple players, right? We sell any particular image to multiple players. And it's priced mainly on a per square kilometer basis. So, people subscribe to an area of interest and they pay per unit area. And the more area they get, of course, the more it costs, but they get bigger pricing discounts as they go up. So it's a volume-based pricing model. Niccolo likes to say we have quite a lot of pricing power. No one else has the scanning system. And so, of course, it does mean that, they really have to come to us for this sort of data, because no one else has it. But we do some value-based pricing, but it's mainly on this per unit area basis.
Great. And there's a question here, this WSJ article keeps coming up. This, again, is going back to this idea that relying too much on government agencies can be problematic. Can you explain again? I know we've touched on it, the commercial client base that you have and expect to have. There's a great slide in the deck which shows a pie chart with your revenue becoming even more diversified over time. Isn't that right, Will? Because you're branching out into more industries.
Absolutely, we see it. So it's roughly split almost like quarter evenly between 4 different vertical markets today, but we see it becoming even more diversified in the future. I mean, we see huge expansion opportunity in all of our core vertical markets today. It's just that we also think that there's big value in some of those new ones as well. So yeah, we got real product to market fit in 4, but we're going to expand out to at least those 4 others that I put onto the slide deck there. And to answer your other point, yes, it's mostly commercial, right? So most of our revenue last year was commercial, not, and we bucked that trend in the industry that is only defense and intelligence. In fact, most of ours is commercial, and even the government component, more of it's civil government than defense and intelligence. So it's those floodings and permit enforcement cases that drive the civil government use case. So we're serving a very different market.
Great. We've had, Will, a number of companies in the space industry come on our program, and we've learned about how it's become cheaper to get satellites in space, and you can send smaller rockets up these days. How much has that benefited you? I mean, could you have done this just using, what was available 15 years ago? Is that part of the story?
It's interesting. So I think it's really cool what's happening. Just Friday, there was a new company, Astra, launching a new nano rocket that was successful. That's really cool. And the more launch providers, the better from our standpoint. But I will say that it's quite a different trend that our company is based on. Because our company launched most of its satellites before the launch costs came down at all. Launch costs were flat for the last 30 years. And our company is based more on the fact that even this launch cost change has only happened in the last couple of years, and mainly because of SpaceX brought down the launch cost about 4x. Well, that's a big deal. But let me tell you what's an even bigger deal. Our satellites have improved to make the cost performance of satellites about 1,000x more in the same time period of any other people's satellites. 1,000x is like the mainframe to desktop computer revolution in IT. It's a huge disruption. So yes, we've seen 4x reduction in the cost for rockets, but we're seeing 1,000x improvement in the cost capability of satellites. And what's the upshot of that? It's data. They're generating and transporting, generating in our case, like Earth observation, and transporting in Starlink's case, the comms satellite fleet, vastly more data. We're talking more than 10 times more than just a few years ago. So the number of satellites has roughly doubled, but the amount of data has gone up 10x because of this cost performance improvement in the satellites. And that's the revolution. And that's why, I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff in space happening right now with new rockets, space tourists, billionaires going up. But that's missing the mark of the economic opportunity. The economic opportunity is in the data and how it helps the Earth economy with digital transformation, with sustainability. I could talk about what's happening in COP and why that's important, but the whole world is moving to a sustainable economy. And what do you need for that? You need to measure natural capital. And what do you need for that? You need satellite data, because basically we scan all of the natural capital every day. So everyone needs this, and that's only going to get more pressing, right? So that's why it's it's obvious that this data is underpinning these massive transformations, and that's the real space renaissance.
Great. Matt, there's an interesting question here from Armindo, and I think this had crossed my mind as well. He said, how is the license data protected? What's to prevent someone from sharing it with someone else? I mean, maybe the only other person who would want it is your competitor, so you wouldn't, but is there a way to protect it?
Yeah, so it's based on end user. So you can say, hey, you have access to use this data, but you can't publish it for reuse. And so it's all about the license terms, essentially.
Great. There's a question here from Carson about partnering with other data analytics companies to serve markets together. Do you think about collaborations like that, or do you think that you want to go it alone and offer your offering to your clients directly?
No, this is a great question. We don't. It's not just going it alone. There's just so many applications sitting on top of our data, and so we like to work with analytics companies that build unique applications for unique industries, merge other data sets. There's just thousands and thousands of those sort of things. We want to let 1,000 flowers bloom on top of our data. So we very much want to partner with the analytics players.
Great. We've talked about competition, and I think that if we can just drive this point home one more time here, you're several years ahead. What would it really take for someone to legitimately be a competitor? I mean, could someone use satellites that are already up there? I mean, is there anything that keeps you up at night, Will, as far as someone sneaking up and all of a sudden being a serious competitor? Because right now, it doesn't look like there is one.
No, I'm not super worried about it. No, so the reason is that you can't just tell existing satellites to add cameras, you have to put the cameras on there, and then that means you have to launch a whole new set of satellites. And so, sorry, I just lost you guys. Yeah, there you are. So it would take 5 years minimum for anyone to build and launch, even if they were perfectly funded with a perfect team, the satellite fleet that we have. No one's even said they're gonna, but if they wanted to, it would take them 5 years. Of course, we're not going to sit on our hands. We're going to continue to innovate in the satellites. Like I said, agile airspace. In fact, there's one differentiator about Planet that's even more significant than the number of satellites. It's the vector of improvement. Our satellites improved 5x in data collection per satellite, in the last year. That's 5x in 1 year. Data per satellite per unit costs stay the same. So that's a big improvement. So Planet's vector of improvement is even sharper. So I think that's super important. And then finally, whilst it is possible in principle to catch us up, it is impossible to go back and get the historical archive. So we now have 1,500 images for every place on the Earth's surface on average. So why is that relevant? So you can see the history and you can train your algorithms. If you ask any machine learning or AI expert, they'll say it's all about the training data. Well, Planet's got that training data. So that's what powers all the analytics that then enables us to go up the stack, and or our partners to go up the stack, like we were just talking about with analytics partners. So that no one else has that. It's impossible to go back in time. I mean, I'm a physicist and I can tell you, no one's invented a time machine yet to go back in time, erect some satellites, and then get all these 1,500 images. It's going to be pretty hard to catch us up there.
All right. Speaking of time, here's what I think is a simple one for you. Tom is asking, what's the time delay for a customer to get an image from the time it's taken?
Typically, just a few hours.
Okay, pretty fast. This is meant to be an investor event, but we've got someone who I think might want to be a customer. Someone's interested in pursuing something. How do they reach out to you guys?
Great. It's very simple, planet.com. So you can go on our website and reach out to a sales rep that way. And learn, of course, more about our products.
We hear this question a lot. I'm curious what your take is. Given the headlines recently, is there any concern with debris from the Russian satellite destruction or just space junk in general? Is that something that you guys put a lot of thought into? Could it cause problems for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so generally, we keep our satellites very low to stop creating debris. The Russians did create an ASAT that creates a lot more pieces of debris, about a couple of thousand objects. Luckily, most of our satellites are above it, so it's not a big concern, this particular event, but it's a very destructive behavior generally, and so we highly discourage it. And in fact, we made a statement condemning that ASAT and also the ASATs of other countries that have happened in the last 10 or 15 years. And so, yes, we absolutely, we think that should be prohibited to blow up satellites, because that's the dominant cause of space debris, not the satellite fleets, it's all the debris. And we need to stop that kind of behavior. So we're very much encouraging our government partners and friends that they need to work on a prohibition of anti-satellite weapons.
Great. I think Jarrett's going to jump back in and ask a couple more questions. We're running out of time here, guys. So please keep the questions coming. And if we don't answer them, I promise we'll share them with the team here. Jarrett, go ahead.
Sure. There's an interesting one here asking about ways that you may be able to participate in the EV industry. We read about EVs all the time. I wonder if there's any applications of your technology in that area.
Well, certainly in the mapping piece, and so our data can be useful for establishing maps per our partnership with Google, and that is, of course, important for driving and navigation, especially as these companies move towards self-driving cars. So our data complements, obviously, the data that the cars themselves are getting with LiDAR and optical cameras on the cars by showing the maps, the lanes, any changes to the road and building infrastructure, so that they can navigate the modern map. You don't want to navigate by a map that's 5 years old, because then you start getting into trouble, right? The lane markings have changed, the road has changed, and so on. And so this gives them that heads up. And so that's, we could see participation there.
I mean, I'd add to that, though, that is even more fundamental, right? You got to mine the lithium to make the batteries. Yeah. You've got to ship stuff around the planet to manufacture. Planet really tracks everything. I mean, by the way, we're also participating in the metaverse because you need our maps, for Pokemon, right? So it's like there's almost no business that doesn't need Planet's data, if you think about it.
I'm sure Mark Zuckerberg will be happy. Here's another question. Is your strategy to become a partner of government and defense a la Palantir, or do you prefer to position yourself as a commercial partner of Fortune 500 companies?
Or both. So firstly, you don't have to choose between those, and when faced with an option, take both if you can. No, but in all seriousness, it's more the latter, right? I mean, but I think every government needs our data. Again, more for civil, but also for security. And then every company needs our data for measuring the ESG targets. Again, so Niccolo is dead right. This data set is relevant for every country and every company, and we intend to go after them all.
I think we had a similar question last time. Do you have a partnership with SpaceX, or maybe you can't talk about it? I forget.
No, I'm happy to talk about it. We do have a partnership with SpaceX. We've launched dozens of satellites on 7 different rockets with SpaceX. I mentioned a couple last year that enabled us to get up to this 12 revisits a year. We've done some unique things with them. I mean, once we had an explosion of a rocket, not their rocket, although we have also been on a rocket, one of theirs that exploded, part of the business. We've had 33 rockets. And just after one of them exploded, so we've got many records. The largest satellite fleet ever launched was one of our records earlier. We also exploded more satellites than anyone else. It's really congratulations to us. Anyway, you go through these challenges, getting up all the satellites. Just after that, we needed the new satellites up really quickly. I called up Elon. He said, "Oh, we got a launch coming up. We have a bit of a space." We managed to build those satellites and deliver them to the launch pad in 8 days. That's the fastest turnaround time, we believe, in the history of space. And then they launched and got recovered from that situation. So that was early on, before we had enough up there. And so we were trying desperately to get them up as quickly as possible. Now we have a lot more redundancies, but it just shows you this kind of rapid partnership we can have with SpaceX.
Well, this has been great. Again, we're almost out of time, but I want to let Niccolo have the final word here. If you'd like to leave us with some parting thoughts here.
Look, Planet is a unique business. It is a monopolist in the whole Earth daily scan. We think we're very early in this opportunity, beginning to compound. Will has virtually no exclusivity and blockouts and using his data repeatedly with any customer. And early on in this company's trajectory, it had some hands tied behind its back, but Google has trusted them with their satellite business. This is a business that has exhibited high return on invested capital throughout the past decade. We believe it has the highest return on invested capital in the sector at the present moment. And going forward, it's really going to add fuel to the fire with the IPO money. So we're spending this capital on growing the sales force, prosecuting not only the inbound leads that have gotten this business to this size, but being able to go out there and go on the offensive and actually show how powerful the data is here as kind of the fuel and the railroads of the digital transformation in the next 10 years, I think, of global digital growth. Planet is disrupting, in my opinion, the data business overall, and they're enlarging the market by constantly making the friction and barriers to using the data lower and lower and lower and lower. You're correct. We have a vote on December 3rd. We welcome your support. We expect to be the most powerful long-term compounder yet in the DMY portfolio. And we believe that the lead that Will Marshall has is the most commanding we've ever seen. So look for this business to go from strength to strength. We look forward to seeing you guys on our first earnings call, our 4th earnings call, our 20th earnings call. But really great things to come from this company. A lot of ways to win organically, a lot of ways to win inorganically.
It's well said. And thank you to our guests, Niccolo and Will. Always a pleasure. Thank you to the audience for watching. A reminder that if you want to see the replay, it will be available in about an hour on ipo-edge.com. And thank you to everyone who watched today, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
See you soon.